After many, many decades of people debating this, you might have figured out the reason why we dream.
Yes, and it's a simple answer. So if you go blind, the visual cortex at the back of the brain gets taken over by hearing and by touch and by other things. In fact, our colleagues at Harvard did an experiment where they blindfolded normally sighted people, and you could start seeing that takeover happening after 60 minutes. And that's when we realized, wow, the purpose of dreaming is to defend the visual territory from takeover from the other senses.
What are the big misconceptions about the brain that people have gone through their life believing? I mean, that's one of them. Something that is true that kind of could fall in place of that is just this fundamental idea that our brains are plastic or sort of adaptable. Because when I found out that I could change my brain by what I do, I found that to be really, really inspiring.
Yes, that's exactly right. So brain plasticity, if someone hasn't heard that term before, it sounds like a weird term, but the reason it came about 100 years ago is because the great psychologist William James pointed out that, if you take a piece of plastic, what we like about that material that we call plastic is that you can mold it into a shape and it'll hold that shape. And that's what your brain does. So if I ask you the name of your third grade teacher, you can remember that name, even though it's been a long time, because your neural networks changed and held on to that piece of information. This is the best thing that you can do for your brain. The reason is because what you're doing is you're constantly building new roadways and pathways in the brain. There's a study that's been going on for decades now called the Religious Orders Study, where a bunch of Catholic nuns agreed to donate their brains for autopsy when they passed away. What the researchers discovered when they look at the brain carefully is that some fraction of these nuns had Alzheimer's disease. Their brains were physically degenerating with the ravages of this dementia. But they didn't show any of the cognitive deficits that one normally has. They didn't seem to be having memory problems and so on. It turns out it's because all these nuns lived in these convents till the day they died. They had social challenges and they had fights with their fellow sisters and they played games with their fellow sisters and they had chores and responsibilities and they were doing stuff. What that means is even as the brain tissue was physically degenerating, they were making new roadways and bridges all the time. And so that's what kept them cognitively healthy. We call that cognitive reserve. Contrast this with people who retire at 65 and they go home and they watch television and their social circles shrink and so on. That's when you've really got concerns because you're not building the new pathways.
Is there data to support that when you retire, if you retire early, or if you retire, say, in your 60s, it increases your probability of an earlier death or cognitive decline?
Almost certainly with cognitive decline, because you're just not getting the challenge. At that point, you're just coasting on your internal model.